Coming up on this week's Weird News, we have stories about secrets in suitcases, crazy jealous ex-girlfriends, why you shouldn't annoy your beautician, and how a mum got revenge on her nagging daughter.
And now, it's time for this week's Weird News with Daniel Bryan.
Welcome back to this week's Weird News, Episode 4. I hope you've all had a good week, and you've been keeping your eye out for some weird and wonderful news stories that you can tell us all about. Downloads of the podcast have dramatically increased over the last week, so thank you very much to our new listeners, who we wish a warm welcome. We've had most downloads from the US, so a big thank you goes across the pond to you too. If you've not listened to this week's Weird News before, this podcast is dedicated to bringing you 4 weird and wonderful news stories that occurred over the past week. We then welcome your views on these stories, and these can be featured on the following show. There is now an abundance of different ways you can contact the show, most of which can be found at our website at
www.thisweeksweirdnews.com.
On the show last week, we introduced 4 stories to you all from week 11. These stories featured a woman hit by a train because she was busy texting on her phone, the incident that made drugs legal for 24 hours in Ireland, a new craze of USB drives embedded in walls called dead drop zones, and how a marketing campaign backfired and started a frenzy of your mum jokes. If you missed any of these stories, you can listen back to our last podcast on our website or find it on iTunes, as well as multiple other podcast feeds. Check out our social media platforms during the week, as we have begun sharing some extra stories with you. These stories are generally ones that we found interesting during the week, but don't meet the cut for the top 4 that we feature on the show.
Comment on Facebook at facebook.com/thisweeksweirdnews or on Twitter @weeksweirdnews.
Over the last week, we've had a message in from Gemma Cole from Liverpool, who says,
Dear This Week's Weird News, I'd noticed a USB stick poking out of a wall on my way to work over the last year, and I've always wondered what it was doing there. I've never thought about actually connecting my laptop to it, and never really paid that much attention, but following last week's show, now I know it was a dead drop zone. I've looked at the Dead Drop Zone website, and it's actually listed as an official drop zone. I'm really keen to see what's stored on it, and I'll be going back with my laptop next week.
Well, Gemma, thanks for getting in touch with the show. I'm glad that we've answered a question that you've been wondering about all this time. You'll have to let us know what you find stored on the stick. Maybe it could even be some weird news that you want to share with us next week. It's also good to know that we've actually had a spotting of one of these in real life, and it's not just on the Dead Drop website. I've noticed there are 2 locations near to me in Oxford, so I may go pop along soon and take a look. If you, like Gemma, want to get in touch with the show and share your stories or comments, please do so in one of the following ways.
Email thisweeksweirdnews@gmail.com. Find us on Skype at This Week's Weird News.
Or you can go to our website at
www.thisweeksweirdnews.com.
Our stories today come from week 12, 2015, or as some may prefer, the 16th to the 22nd of March.
Story number 1.
This week, Polish border guards detained a French citizen believed to be in his 60s at border control. He was travelling by train between Moscow and Nice in France. But why was he stopped? Not because he didn't have the right to pass through, or that he didn't have his passport. Being part of the EU, he is allowed to travel from Belarus to Poland. So what made these guards even give him a second look? Well, border guards were alerted to the man due to the very large suitcase the man had with him. Drug smuggling, maybe? Well, no. Border guards made the man open the suitcase to see what he was transporting over 3,000 kilometres right across Europe. To the guards' surprise, when they opened the suitcase, they found a Russian woman in her 30s. Now, I've had some uncomfortable plane journeys where legroom is rather restrictive, but this is a whole new level. Had she been in the suitcase since Moscow? Okay, so this is considerably less than the 3,000 kilometres she was planning to be in the suitcase, but it was still around 1,000 kilometres or 621 miles from Moscow. Guards initially assumed the young lady was a victim of human trafficking. To the astonishment of the guards, again, the couple declared that they were indeed married, and that the woman was travelling at her own free will. Well, the man explained that his wife was not able to travel between the two countries due to border laws, and that this was the only way he felt he could get her home. Border guards then explained to the man that due to EU rules, his wife was actually allowed to enter if they could prove they were married. So essentially, she could have been sat next to him on the train and not in the overhead storage compartment. This was not, however, it for our couple. Although their travel was now deemed legal, and that she could be somewhat comfier for the rest of her journey, they had now broken other laws, like evading border control, and they could now face 3 years in prison. Luckily for the couple, they were later released after questioning, and when their stories were validated. They have now returned to Belarus, and will potentially attempt their homeward journey again at some point. But this time, I think his wife will be demanding first class, and he has some making up to do.
Story number 2.
Is your girlfriend jealous and bitter against your ex-girlfriends? Or are you a girlfriend that worries your man may go back to his ex and leave you? These sort of things can end up breaking up couples, and cause a lot of grief and sadness. However, this week in China, 2 bickering love rivals took this to a new level. 3 months ago, Wu Hixia split up with his girlfriend Zheng Teng after falling for another girl, who he then started seeing. His ex was distinctly heartbroken over this, and for the next 3 months since they split, she's been begging Wu to return to her. Now, as you can imagine, this would not have been easy for his new girlfriend, when his phone keeps ringing and having her turn up at the door begging for him back. I guess on the plus side, it must have been slightly flattering for him that both of them liked him so much. This got too much for Wu, so he arranged a meeting between the 3 of them to explain to his ex that he'd moved on and he no longer felt the same way about her. The 3 of them gathered at a beauty spot in East China's Zhejiang province, where the incident happened. The 2 girls began arguing and insulting each other, both determined they were the better match for Wu. Zheng, his ex-girlfriend, was so offended by one of the comments made by his new lover, she thought that the only way to show that he loved her was to do something dramatic. At this point, his ex jumped into the river and began calling his ex-lover's name, asking him to save her. This extreme move was to evoke the love she believed her ex had for her, and when he saves her, prove to his new flame that he truly loves her more. Now, if the situation could not be more bizarre and crazy, his new girlfriend, worried that her boyfriend would save his ex, and that she may lose him as a result, also jumped into the river. At this point, you can only imagine what must have been going through Wu's head, wondering if any of these girls are worth the time at all. Wu promptly decided to end this debate. He jumped into the river himself and rescued his new girlfriend before taking her to the hospital due to some minor injuries she had incurred. He did not save his ex. Instead, on the way to the hospital, he rang his brother and asked him to go and rescue his ex-girlfriend. I guess this was to perhaps put his conscience at ease for leaving her in the river. I guess now his ex will have got the message that he has moved on and he is no longer interested anymore. It was, however, a rather painful, not to mention wet and cold, way to find this out. The crazy antics portrayed by these women in other countries may have gotten them carted off for more tests to check their mental well-being. In China, there is also a chronic shortage of women, due to their laws on 1 child per couple. With this, however, Wu had 2 girls fighting over him alone. So, Zheng, don't worry, there's plenty more fish in the river. You can become part of this week's Weird News. This section of the show could be dedicated to you. Sponsor the show and we can fill this section with a tailor-made advert just for you. Reach your audience in a different way with the power of a podcast. We are open to your ideas, so get in touch at thisweeksweirdnews@gmail.com. Get on board with us now as our listeners grow and we can reach more and more subscribers together.
Story number 3.
Our third story this week takes us back to Russia, where a model and former makeup instructor went to get her nails done. Not much of a story, I hear you say, nor is it very strange or bizarre. Well, things did get a little more bizarre, and also painful for our model Maria. She had gone in for a manicure in her home city, where she met beautician Anastasia. A little while into the process, Maria was not happy with the level of service she was receiving. She complained to Anastasia, calling the service shoddy and unprofessional. Maria claims that the beautician was using dirty nail files and she wasn't disinfecting her instruments. At this point, you'd imagine that the beautician would possibly apologise and try to improve the service for the customer. However, Anastasia took a slightly different approach. She filed Maria's nails and filed some more. In fact, she filed so much that she got down to skin and caused her fingers to bleed. Maria only noticed when she felt discomfort and she looked down at her fingers and they were bleeding. Later on that night, after attempting to bandage up her fingers, she decided to go to hospital as they were swollen and causing her a lot of pain. She was diagnosed with having acute purulent inflammation and 2 of her fingernails had to be removed. To add further insult to Maria, it is also not known whether her 2 fingernails will ever regrow. Maria is now obviously suing the salon, claiming that she had already lost 3 modelling jobs due to the deformation of her fingers. The only response from the salon so far is that they understand Maria's complaint and they've accepted responsibility, and as a result, deducted £30 from the beautician's pay. £30. What do you think? Is that as much of a joke as it sounds? Get in touch with your views.
Story number 4.
As a kid, you never enjoy having to do PE, or physical education as it stands for. I guess there are different acronyms around the world for this. Well, here in the UK, Olivia McEnvoy, who was aged 11, was nagging her mum to write her a sick note so she could get out of doing PE. She has done this on many different occasions, and each time her mum has declined and told her that she needs to participate. Well, this week, her mum gave in and wrote her a note to take with her. She sealed it in an envelope and asked her daughter to give it to the teacher. Delighted by this news, she took the note in with her the next day to present to the teacher. Olivia gave the note to her teacher. Obviously, he read it, and promptly called Olivia back. He passed the note back to her and she read it. The note said,
"Dear Mr. Whittle, Olivia has requested that I write her a note for PE. Here it is. Olivia is perfectly fit and well to take part in her PE lesson today. The only thing she's suffering with is a severe case of bone idolitis. Olivia's complaint is, it's too cold to participate. Might I suggest a few extra laps to warm her up? Please return to Olivia after reading. Regards, Mrs. McCavey."
Clearly, her mum has a sense of humour, and really set her up on this one. Also, as another insult to Olivia, her parents had arranged for her PE kit to be dropped off at the school without her knowledge, just so she could join in after all. In typical kid style, Olivia didn't speak to her dad on the journey home from school. Later that evening, Olivia's parents attended the school for Parents' Evening, and numerous teachers commented as to how funny it had been. Olivia, over the years, has tried every trick in the book to get out of PE, from forgetting her kit on purpose to pretending she's hurt her leg. So maybe this was adequate payback for her. Have you ever played a joke like this on one of your children or loved ones? Get in touch with your views. There we have it. This week's 4 stories. I don't know what's happened to the world this week, but I think we've had some of the weirdest stories we've ever featured. Maybe it's something to do with the power of the solar eclipse. If you have any views or comments you want to express about any of these stories, or if you have any of your own, get in contact with the show. You can
email thisweeksweirdnews@gmail.com,
or go to our social media pages.
comment on Facebook at facebook.com/thisweeksweirdnews, or on Twitter @weeksweirdnews.
Or you can go to our website, where you'll find all these contact details and more about the show. To do this, go to
www.thisweeksweirdnews.com.
Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes. Thank you for listening, and hopefully we will see you again next week.
Join us next time for more weird and wonderful news from around the world. Only on This Week's Weird News. Goodbye.